June 25th, 1982, two science fiction masterpieces opened on the same day, and both bombed spectacularly. One was Blade Runner, the other was John Carpenter's The Thing. Critics called it instant junk, a great barf bag movie, and Cinefantastic literally asked if it was the most hated movie of all time. The failure almost destroyed Carpenter's career. Today, it's considered the greatest practical effects horror movie ever made. Today, I'm breaking down 12 things you didn't know about The Thing, the dark truth behind the film that proves box office failure doesn't mean artistic failure.
Welcome to the dark truth of John Carpenter's The Thing. What was your favorite transformation? Was it me? Stick around and learn about how this movie almost killed the production crew.
Released on June 25th, 1982, The Thing is John Carpenter's remake of the 1951 film The Thing from Another World, both based on John W. Campbell's 1938 novella Who Goes There. It stars Kurt Russell as helicopter pilot R.J. MacReady, leading an ensemble cast at an Antarctic research station that discovers a shape-shifting alien capable of perfectly imitating any living thing. The film made only $19 million on a $50 million budget, was savaged by critics, and nearly ended Carpenter's career. But VHS and cable TV turned it into a cult phenomenon, and today it's considered one of the greatest horror films ever made. 1. On June 25th, 1982, two now legendary science fiction films opened on the exact same day. John Carpenter's The Thing and Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. Both were directed by masters of the genre. Both featured groundbreaking visuals. Both had talented casts. And both absolutely tanked at the box office, receiving harsh reviews and poor audience reception. Imagine being a sci-fi fan in 1982 and having to choose between these two masterpieces on opening weekend. Except nobody knew they were masterpieces yet. Blade Runner made $6.1 million opening weekend and topped out at $33.8 million total. The Thing made $3.1 million opening weekend and finished with only $19 million. Both were considered critical and commercial failures. Critics hated Blade Runner's slow pacing. They hated The Thing's gore and nihilism. The fact that two of cinema's greatest sci-fi films opened the same day and both failed shows how wrong initial reactions can be. It took VHS, cable TV, and years of reevaluation for both films to find their audiences and be recognized as the masterpieces they are. 2. The Thing's real killer wasn't Blade Runner. It was Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which had opened 2 weeks earlier on June 11th, 1982. E.T. presented aliens as friendly, lovable creatures who phone home. The Thing presented aliens as horrifying parasites that imitate and consume you. Audiences in 1982 chose optimism over nihilism. Carpenter himself said E.T. was the complete opposite of his film. Spielberg understood the cultural mood. America was coming out of a recession. Reagan preached Morning in America. The audiences wanted hope, not horror. E.T. became the highest grossing film of all time and held that record for 15 years. The Thing was called too dark, too violent, and too depressing. John Carpenter's instincts were brilliant, but his timing was catastrophic. If The Thing had been released in 1976 during the post-Watergate, post-Vietnam cynicism, it might have been a huge hit. But in Reagan's optimistic 1982, it was DOA. Cultural timing matters as much as quality. 3. Special effects designer Rob Bottin was only 22 years old when he started working on The Thing. He worked 7 days a week for 57 weeks straight, over a year, often sleeping on set to avoid commuting. The workload was so intense that Bottin was hospitalized with double pneumonia, exhaustion, and a bleeding ulcer caused by stress. Bottin literally worked himself into the hospital creating these effects. He moved onto the Universal lot for an entire year, sleeping in locker rooms and on sets, never taking a single day off. Doctors confirmed his health issues were directly caused by stress and overwork. When Bottin finally collapsed, John Carpenter had to call in Stan Winston to finish the dog transformation scene. Winston refused screen credit because he felt it was Botton's movie. That's how dedicated Botton was. His peers respected his sacrifice. Botton's work set the standard for practical effects, but at enormous personal cost. This is why The Thing's effects can never truly be replicated. Nobody would allow that level of sacrifice today. 4. John Carpenter was supposed to direct Stephen King's Firestarter as his next project after The Thing. But when The Thing bombed and critics savaged it, Universal Studios fired Carpenter from Firestarter. He was also under a multi-film contract with Universal, but the studio paid to buy him out just to get rid of him. Carpenter said, "I take every failure hard. The one that I took the hardest was The Thing. My career would have been different if it had been a big hit." Universal didn't just drop him from Firestarter, they terminated his entire contract. That's brutal. Carpenter went from being a hot director after Halloween and Escape from New York to being considered box office poison. In a 1985 Starlog interview, he admitted the failure devastated him. Carpenter wouldn't fully recover professionally for years. The irony is that The Thing is a masterpiece, but the industry punished him for making art that was ahead of its time. This is why Carpenter became such an independent, iconoclastic filmmaker. He learned that studios don't reward vision, they reward profits. 5. When Rob Bottin was hospitalized, special effects legend Stan Winston stepped in to create the Dog Thing transformation, one of the film's most iconic and terrifying sequences. Winston designed and built it in Bottin's absence, but refused to take official credit in the opening titles, insisting it was Bottin's movie. He only accepted a special thanks in the end credits. The Dog Thing is the first major creature we see, and it's one of the most disturbing. A normal-looking husky that splits open into tentacles, teeth, and nightmare biology. Stan Winston created that, but he refused prominent credit out of respect for Bottin's year of sacrifice. That's class. Ironically, Bottin was actually relieved he didn't have to do the Dog Thing because he'd done so many dog animatronics by that point, he was sick of them. The collaboration between these two legends resulted in cinema's greatest practical effects showcase, and the mutual respect they showed each other is rare in competitive Hollywood. 6. To make the interior Antarctic base look authentic, the production refrigerated entire sound stages to 40 degrees Fahrenheit so the actor's breath would be visible. The cast and crew spent 3 months filming in genuinely freezing conditions on 6 different refrigerated sound stages in Los Angeles. They didn't use CGI breath effects because CGI didn't exist yet. They actually made the sets cold. Kurt Russell and the cast wore their heavy winter gear for real because the stages were actually freezing. Cinematographer Dean Cundy said cameras used outside during location shooting in British Columbia had to stay outside, and the cameras used inside had to stay inside. The temperature changes would ruin the lenses. Kurt Russell said the crew barely survived the cold. That commitment to practical realism is why The Thing feels so authentic. You're watching actors genuinely uncomfortable and cold, which adds to the tension and believability. 7. Rob Bottin covered the Blair Thing creature with a substance that created the exposed green anatomy and visceral look, but the substance was made of melted plastic and bubblegum, giving off flammable fumes like paint thinner and lacquer. When Carpenter wanted flames under the camera for continuity, the crew set up a fire bar while the room filled with explosive fumes. When they ignited the fire bar, the entire room went up in flames. Bottin describes the moment. The flammable substance is off-gassing toxic fumes. They light the fire bar for the shot and suddenly the entire set is on fire. The Blair Thing itself caught fire and Carpenter yelled, "Don't just stand there, put it out, you idiot." They got it under control, but it took an entire day to reset everything for a second take. The fact that they almost burned down a Universal soundstage filming a creature covered in melting bubblegum is the most 80s practical effects story imaginable. Nobody thought about safety, they just wanted it to look good. 8. In the scene where McReady holds the camp at bay with a flare and stick of dynamite, Kurt Russell had to rush his dialogue to finish before the flare burned out. According to Carpenter's commentary, Russell and the crew were constantly burning their hands on flares and incendiary materials throughout production. Russell couldn't do multiple takes. The flare had a time limit, so he had to nail the scene before it expired. That's why his delivery feels so urgent and authentic. He's not acting rushed, he is rushed, because the prop is literally burning down in real time. Russell and Carpenter repeatedly burned their hands during filming because practical effects meant real fire, real danger, real consequences. That physical commitment shows in every frame. Modern films would CGI the flare and do 50 takes. The Thing did it practically in one take, with actual danger. 9. The production deliberately cast unknown actor Wilford Brimley as senior biologist Blair because they wanted an everyman whose absence from scenes wouldn't be questioned by audiences. Brimley was intended to become infected early in the film, off-screen, so audiences wouldn't know his intentions. Carpenter wanted Donald Pleasance, but decided he was too recognizable. This is brilliant casting strategy. If they'd cast a famous actor as Blair, audiences would watch his every move, waiting for him to turn. By casting the unknown Brimley, audiences didn't suspect him until the reveal. Brimley plays Blair as genuinely terrified, then paranoid, then absent. And you don't question it because he seems legitimately broken by what he's learned. The fact that Blair was always infected but hiding it perfectly is one of the film's smartest narrative choices. Brimley's performance sold that deception completely. 10. During rehearsals, the actors spent hours debating whether their characters would know if they'd been assimilated by the Thing. This wasn't in the script, it was the cast trying to understand how to play potential infection. As part of the Thing's design, Carpenter and Botten agreed that anyone assimilated would be a perfect imitation and would not know they were the Thing. This adds terrifying implications. If you're assimilated, you don't know it. You think you're still human. You have all your memories, your personality, your fears. But you're actually the Thing, perfectly imitating yourself. That means when characters insist that they're human, they might genuinely believe it while being wrong. The actors debating this during rehearsals shows how deeply engaged they were with the material. That philosophical depth. What is identity? What makes you human elevates the Thing above typical monster movies. 11. Universal executives were concerned about the Thing's bleak, ambiguous ending after test audiences reacted poorly. Some wanted an alternate ending where MacReady survives unambiguously. Carpenter fought for his vision and kept the uncertain ending. However, a TV version later added a narration and an alternate ending where MacReady escapes and proves he's human through a blood test. Carpenter had no control over this and hated it. Carpenter's ending is perfect because it's ambiguous. We don't know if MacReady or Childs is the Thing. We don't know if either will survive. That uncertainty mirrors the entire theme. You can't trust anyone, including yourself. The studio wanted closure, but Carpenter understood that horror needs uncertainty. The network's decision to add a happy ending years later proves that networks fundamentally misunderstood what made the Thing great. Carpenter's willingness to fight the studio for his bleak vision is why the film endures. Compromise would have killed it. 12. The Thing bombed in 1982 because it was the wrong film at the wrong time. Critics called it instant junk. Audiences hated the gore and nihilism, and Carpenter's career nearly ended. But VHS and cable gave it second life. New generations discovered it, appreciated it, and recognized it as a masterpiece. Today it's considered the greatest practical effects horror film ever made, and regularly appears on best horror films of all time lists. The Thing proves that initial reception means nothing compared to lasting impact. Blade Runner bombed the same day. Both are now considered masterpieces. E.T. was a massive hit in 1982 and it's still beloved, but The Thing's influence on horror is arguably deeper. Rob Bottin's effects works became the standard. Carpenter's paranoia-driven storytelling influenced decades of horror. The ambiguous ending showed filmmakers that audiences could handle uncertainty. The lesson is clear. Box office failure doesn't mean artistic failure. Sometimes you're just ahead of your time. Sometimes audiences need years to catch up to your vision. The Thing was hated in 1982, but it's worshipped today in 2026. That's the ultimate validation. Time proved Carpenter right. The Thing failed big time, nearly destroyed John Carpenter's career, and was dismissed as the most hated movie of all time. but Rob Bottin destroyed his health, creating effects that have never been surpassed. Kurt Russell and the cast froze on refrigerated sets and burned their hands on real flares. Carpenter fought the studio to keep his bleak vision intact, and all that sacrifice paid off, just not immediately. It took years, but The Thing found its audience and became the gold standard. So here's my question. What's your favorite Thing transformation? The dog? The chest chomp? The spider head? The Blair monster? And do you think MacReady or Childs is the Thing at the end? Drop your theories in the comments. Let's debate this masterpiece. Next week I'm covering They Live, another John Carpenter film that bombed and became a cult classic. Hit subscribe if you love these deep dives into underrated masterpieces. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest art is the art that fails first.
Welcome to the dark truth of John Carpenter's The Thing. What was your favorite transformation? Was it me? Stick around and learn about how this movie almost killed the production crew.